The pressure in the cabin was a living thing. Imani felt it settle in her bones, a low hum of anxiety that had nothing to do with the altitude. For 10 hours, she had pretended the man beside her did not exist. It was a practiced skill, the art of making her own considerable frame invisible. She curled into the plush leather of the business-class seat, her beige wool sweater a soft armor against the recycled air and the man's unnerving stillness. He had boarded in New York, a silent storm in a suit so black it seemed to drink the light. It was tailored with surgical precision to a body that was all lean muscle and sharp angles, a stark contrast to her own soft curves. He hadn't glanced at her, his focus absolute as he settled in, placing a slim briefcase by his feet. But his presence was an occupation. It filled the space, cold and deliberate, smelling faintly of cedar and something metallic, like rain on stone. Imani focused on the book in her lap, a 19th-century text on Korean pottery she was meant to restore. The familiar scent of aging paper and leather was her anchor in the sterile, suspended world of air travel. She was an archivist. Her life was quiet, ordered, a careful negotiation with the past. This trip to Seoul was the biggest professional opportunity of her life, a 6-month contract with the prestigious National Museum. It was a world away from the dusty basements of New York universities. A world away from everything she knew. The man beside her hadn't moved a muscle for the last hour. He wasn't sleeping. His eyes were closed, but his posture was alert, his hands resting on his thighs. They were elegant hands, long-fingered and clean, but there was a tension in them that spoke of tightly coiled strength. A thin, silvery scar cut across his right knuckle, the only imperfection on an otherwise flawless canvas. She told herself it was survival instinct, this cataloging of a stranger. A way to manage the low-grade fear his sheer intensity provoked. That was when the flight attendant, a man with a smile that didn't reach his eyes, stopped beside their row. He addressed the man in the black suit, his voice a low murmur. Imani kept her eyes on her book, but she couldn't block out the sound. "Mr. Kwon," the attendant said, offering a glass of water. "We'll be beginning our descent into Incheon shortly." Mr. Kwon didn't open his eyes. He simply gave a short, almost imperceptible nod. The attendant's smile tightened. He placed the water on the small table between them, his hand shaking slightly. As he straightened up, his sleeve caught the edge of the glass. Cold water splashed across the console, soaking the edge of Imani's antique book. A gasp escaped her lips, sharp and involuntary. She snatched the book up, her heart sinking as she saw the dark stains spreading across the delicate, watermarked pages.
No, no, no.
"My deepest apologies," the attendant said, his voice strained. He fumbled for a napkin. "Don't touch it," Imani snapped, her voice sharper than she intended. Her professional calm shattered. "You'll only make it worse," cradling the book like a wounded bird. She worked to blot the excess water with her own napkin, her movements precise and practiced. The damage was significant. Years of careful preservation, threatened by a moment of clumsiness. The man beside her finally moved. His eyes opened, and for the first time, they focused on her. They were dark, obsidian sharp, and held a chilling lack of emotion. He looked from her face to the damaged book in her hands, then back to the flight attendant, who had frozen in place. "You are clumsy," Mr. Kwon said. His voice was quiet, a low baritone that cut through the cabin's hum with absolute authority. It was not a question. It was a verdict. The attendant paled. "Sir, it was an accident. The turbulence." "There was no turbulence," Mr. Kwon stated, his gaze unwavering. He made a small, deliberate gesture with his hand, a flick of the wrist. "Leave." The attendant didn't need to be told twice. He practically fled down the aisle. Imani was left in a bubble of suffocating silence, the cold weight of the man's attention now fully on her. She expected him to dismiss her, to turn away and retreat back into his fortress of stillness. Instead, he spoke again, his eyes on the book. "Is it valuable?" "It's irreplaceable," she said, her voice tight with frustration. "The paper is brittle. The ink is water-soluble. This kind of damage is," she trailed off, shaking her head. Why was she explaining this to him? He watched her for a long moment, his expression unreadable. "You know what you're doing again," a statement, not a question. He had observed the careful way she handled the book, the economy of her movements. She met his gaze, a spark of defiance rising through her anxiety. "It's my job." A flicker of something, not interest, more like assessment, passed through his dark eyes. He leaned forward slightly, his motion fluid and predatory. The scent of cedar intensified. He was close enough now that she could feel the heat radiating from his body. And that's when she saw it. As he moved, the cuff of his pristine white shirt rode up an inch, revealing the edge of a tattoo on his wrist, the intricate scales of a dragon, its inka deep, menacing blue-black against his pale skin. The image hit her like a physical blow. It was a symbol she had seen before, in the margins of her late father's old business ledgers. Ledgers filled with names and figures she had never understood, tied to a part of his life in Seoul he never spoke of. The Kwon family crest. Her blood ran cold. Mr. Kwon.
Kwon Ji-han.
The name echoed from a past she had tried to forget, a story her mother had told her in hushed, fearful whispers after her father's funeral. A story of a deal made between families. A promise. A betrothal. The cabin lights flickered. The seatbelt sign chimed on. But Imani didn't hear it. The air was gone from her lungs. She was sitting next to the man her father had promised her to, the heir to a criminal empire. And he had absolutely no idea who she was. He saw a clumsy, plus-sized American woman with a ruined book. Nothing more. Then, everything changed. The flight attendant who had spilled the water was walking back up the aisle, his face a mask of sweat. But he wasn't looking at them. His eyes were fixed on the front of the cabin. In his hand, he held not a tray, but something small and metallic. He raised it. Before Imani could process what was happening, Kwon Ji-han moved. It wasn't a panicked reaction. It was an act of pure, lethal physics. In one seamless motion, he unbuckled his seatbelt, his arm shot out, and he shoved her down.
Hard.
Her head hit the armrest, but his body was already covering hers, a shield of tailored wool and solid muscle. The weight of him was immense, pressing the air from her chest. A soft, muffled thump echoed through the cabin, followed by a choked gasp. A few passengers screamed. The plane lurched violently, not from turbulence, but from a sudden, sharp change in piloting. Pinned beneath him, with her face pressed into the cheap polyester of the seat cushion, Imani could only hear. The scuffle was brutally short. A wet, sickening crack. The thud of a body hitting the floor. Then silence. A profound, ringing silence broken only by the engine's drone and a few whimpering passengers. The weight on top of her shifted. He moved off her, as silent and fluid as before. She pushed herself up slowly, her heart hammering against her ribs. The flight attendant was on the floor in the aisle, his neck bent at an impossible angle. A small, wicked-looking blade lay a few feet from his outstretched hand. Two other men, large and dressed in black suits identical to Jihan's, were suddenly there, materializing from other seats. They flanked him, their faces grim and impassive. Jihan stood, adjusting his suit jacket. It wasn't even wrinkled. He looked down at the body without a flicker of emotion. Then his gaze moved, sweeping over the terrified faces of the other passengers before landing, with unmistakable force, on her. He didn't recognize her as his long-lost fiancée. He didn't see the ghost of a promise made between fathers. He saw a witness, a loose end, a complication in a world that did not tolerate them. She saw everything. One of his men murmured in Korean, his voice low. Jihan's eyes never left hers. "I am aware," he replied in perfect, unaccented English. He took a step toward her. "It seems, miss." He was asking for her name. Her real name. The one that would connect her to him in a way he couldn't possibly imagine. Giving it to him felt like pulling the pin from a grenade. But lying seemed infinitely more dangerous. "Imani," she said, her voice barely a whisper. "Imani Williams." He tilted his head, the name clearly meaning nothing to him. But the silence that followed was not empty. It was filled with calculation, with the cold, hard math of his world. The plane began its final, steady descent into Seoul, but for Imani, the ground had already vanished from beneath her feet. She was falling, and the man who had just saved her life was the one who was about to ensure she never landed. The sterile efficiency of Incheon Airport was a blur. Imani was escorted off the plane before any other passengers, flanked by Kwon Ji-han's silent, imposing men. No customs, no baggage claim. She was moved through private corridors and service elevators, a ghost in the machine. The air outside the terminal was cold and sharp, biting at her cheeks. A black sedan, sleek and impossibly clean, waited at the curb, its engine a low purr. Ji-han slid into the back seat, not looking at her. He simply held the door open, an unspoken, absolute command. Her legs felt like lead, but she complied, sinking into the cool leather beside him. The door closed with a heavy, final thud, sealing them inside. The car pulled away from the curb with a smoothness that felt like a predator beginning its stalk. They drove in silence through the sprawling, glittering expanse of Seoul. The city lights smeared against the tinted windows, a world she was supposed to explore, now just a backdrop to her own abduction. She clutched her travel tote, the damp, ruined book inside a painful reminder of the life that had evaporated the moment that glass of water had tipped. "My men will retrieve your luggage," Ji-han said, his voice startling in the quiet. He was looking straight ahead, his profile carved from shadow and streetlight. "It will be brought to you." "Brought to me where?" she asked, her voice steadier than she felt. Competence under pressure. It was the only tool she had. "Mr. Kwon, I have a contract with the National Museum. People are expecting me." "Your plans have changed," he said simply. "You are a security risk. Until I can determine the extent of that risk, you will remain with me." "Remain with you? You can't just
Kidnap me.
I'm an American citizen. I have rights." He finally turned his head, and the full force of his gaze hit her. There was no malice in it, which was somehow more terrifying. There was only a chilling pragmatism. "In New York, you have rights. In my car, in my city, you have my protection. Or my judgment. The choice of which you receive is entirely up to you." The threat was unmistakable, wrapped in the language of logic. This was his territory, his empire. She was a foreign piece on his board, and he would move her wherever he saw fit. Arguing was pointless. It was like reasoning with a tidal wave. The car descended into an underground garage, the tires hissing on the polished concrete. They came to a stop in a private bay, and the doors of the car were opened by more men in dark suits. They led them to a private elevator, which ascended with dizzying speed. When the doors opened, they did so directly into a penthouse apartment that was less a home and more a monument to wealth and power. Floor-to-ceiling windows revealed a breathtaking panorama of Seoul, the Han River a dark ribbon winding through a galaxy of lights. The space was vast, minimalist, decorated in shades of charcoal, black and white. A single, perfect orchid sat on a low-slung marble table. There was no clutter, no personal touch, no sign that a human being actually lived here. It was as cold and controlled as the man himself. "You'll stay in the guest suite," he said, gesturing down a long hallway. "Do not attempt to leave. The doors are locked. The windows are reinforced. You will not be successful, and you will only make things more difficult for yourself." He paused, his eyes narrowing slightly. "Tell me again what you do for a living." "I'm a conservator," she said, lifting her chin. "I specialize in antique paper and texts." "A librarian," he said, the words sounding like an insult. "An archivist," she corrected, a flash of her old self breaking through the fear. "There's a difference." For the first time, a ghost of a smile touched his lips, though it held no warmth. It was the smile of a predator that finds its prey more interesting than expected. "We will see." The next few days passed in a surreal, suspended state. Imani was a prisoner in a gilded cage. The guest suite was luxurious, with a bed larger than her entire New York bedroom and a bathroom clad in black marble. Meals appeared outside her door on a silent tray, exquisite Korean dishes she ate without tasting. She had her luggage, her clothes, her toiletries. But she had no phone, no laptop, no connection to the outside world. Instead, he would watch her. She would be reading in the living area, trying to salvage her damaged book with the limited tools she had, and she would feel his eyes on her. He would stand in the doorway, perfectly still, just observing. She learned to live with the constant, low-level hum of his surveillance. She refused to cower. She established a routine. She did the stretching exercises she always did in the morning. She spent hours meticulously working on the book, separating the damp pages with tweezers fashioned from paper clips. She read every book on the shelves in the living room, all of them dry histories and economic texts in English. She was demonstrating, to him and to herself, that she was not broken. She was contained, but she was not conquered. One evening, he came into the living area while she was working. He didn't speak, just sat in a leather armchair opposite her, a glass of whiskey in his hand. The silence stretched, thick with unspoken questions. "You're not afraid," he said finally. It wasn't a compliment. It was a puzzle he was trying to solve. "You should be." "Being afraid doesn't seem like a very useful survival strategy in this situation," she replied, not looking up from her work. "Panicking is a luxury I can't afford." He took a slow sip of his whiskey. "Most people panic. They beg. They cry. They offer me money. All I have is a ruined book and a contract I'm about to default on." His eyes dropped to the book in her hands. "The men who attacked me on the plane were from the Choi family, a rival organization. They believe a show of force will convince me to cede my territory in Itaewon." He said it so casually, as if discussing a business negotiation. "Killing me would have been a bonus. They failed. Now they are looking for another point of leverage, another way to wound me." He was telling her why he was keeping her. Not for what she saw, but for what she represented. A potential weakness. A loose thread. "And you think they know about me? They know someone was with me. A foreign woman. They are not stupid. They are thorough. They will find out who you are. And when they do, they will come for you." The temperature in the room seemed to drop. This was the true danger. It wasn't just that she was his prisoner, it was that she was now his liability, his target. That night, she couldn't sleep. The city lights felt menacing, the eyes of 1,000 enemies. She found herself pacing the length of the apartment, the soft fabric of her pajamas whispering against the cold floor. She stopped in front of a large, lacquered screen in a corner of the main living area. It seemed out of place in the sterile modernism of the penthouse. On impulse, she pushed it aside. Behind it was a wall of photographs. Not family portraits, but stark, black-and-white images of a woman. A Korean woman, hauntingly beautiful, with sad, intelligent eyes. In some, she was smiling. In others, she looked off into the distance, a profound melancholy in her expression. Jihan's wound. The one vulnerability he carried. It was a shrine. Her name was Minjun. Jihan's voice came from the shadows behind her. She jumped, her heart leaping into her throat. He stepped into the dim light, dressed in a simple black t-shirt and gray pants. Without the armor of his suit, he looked younger, but no less dangerous. "She was my father's choice for me," he said, his voice devoid of its usual hard edge. It was flat, hollowed out. "A suitable match to unite our family with another. I refuse." He walked to the wall, his fingers gently tracing the edge of one of the frames. "The Choi family saw my refusal as an insult to their own ambitions. They saw her as a tool, a way to force my hand. They took her. By the time I found her," he stopped. He didn't need to finish the sentence. The absolute stillness of his grief was more powerful than any words. "My father called it a failure of discipline. I called it a failure of mine. I was not strong enough. I was not fast enough. I failed to protect what was mine." Imani stood frozen, the confession hanging in the air between them. This was the core of him, the shame he carried, the cold, hard shell he had built around that failure. He was a man who would never allow himself to have a weakness again. And that's when she realized the full, terrifying scope of her situation. He was keeping her here not just to protect her from the Choi family, but to protect himself from a repeat of his own history. She was a liability he had to control, a ghost he had to contain. He turned from the wall, his eyes finding hers in the darkness. The raw pain in them was something she was not prepared for. It was a glimpse beneath the mask, a look into the furnace that forged his coldness. She could have used it. She could have shown fear, pleaded for her freedom, played on the memory of the woman he had lost. Instead, she made a choice. She looked at this powerful, broken man, and she saw not a monster, but a man imprisoned by his own past. "I'm sorry," she said, the words soft but clear in the quiet room. "I'm sorry for your loss." She didn't run. She didn't plead. She simply stood her ground and offered him a moment of genuine human empathy. For a long, breathless moment, he just looked at her, his expression unreadable. The silence between them was not empty. It was charged, heavy with the weight of his past and her uncertain future. He took a half-step toward her, his hand lifting as if to touch her, then dropping back to his side. It was a small, almost deniable gesture of tenderness, an impulse controlled before it could be born. He turned and walked away without another word, leaving her alone with the ghosts. That was the moment everything changed. She had seen the man behind the Mafia boss, and she had made the deliberate choice not to use it against him. She had chosen to stay, not just as a prisoner, but as a witness to his humanity. It was a choice that would cost her more than she could ever imagine.